Welcome to Ian Cinema, your destination for endless entertainment and unforgettable movie moments. Discover exciting films, inspiring stories, and cinematic journeys across every genre. Whether you love action, drama, thrillers, or timeless favorites, there's always something waiting for you here. Sit back, enjoy the experience, and let Ian Cinema bring the magic of movies to your screen. The movie opens in 2023, with the world on the verge of collapse. Mutants are being hunted relentlessly, and not only the mutants themselves, but also the humans who once stood beside them. Fearsome Sentinels, enormous robotic enforcers, descend from the sky in massive pods, targeting the last surviving X-Men hiding in Moscow. Just when everything seems hopeless, the story shifts thousands of miles away to China. The jet lands among the rugged mountains, carrying some of the most legendary mutants. Professor Charles Xavier, Storm, Wolverine, and Magneto. They reunite with Kitty Pryde, Bishop, and the other surviving mutants, where an astonishing discovery is revealed. The mutants who were killed in Moscow are alive again. This seemingly impossible miracle is the result of Kitty's extraordinary ability to manipulate the timeline. She was able to send Bishop's consciousness into the past, allowing him to foresee the deadly attack and warn the others before it happened. Professor Xavier explains what is at stake. Kitty's ability to send a person's consciousness back through time may be the only chance they have to stop the Sentinel threat. But traveling back just a few days would not be enough. They must go decades into the past to prevent these adaptive killing machines from ever being created. The origins of the Sentinel program can be traced back to Dr. Bolivar Trask, obsessed with controlling mutant abilities. Trask began experimenting on mutants and using their powers to advance his scientific research. One mutant, Raven, discovers his sinister plans and confronts him, ultimately taking his life. However, she is captured in the process. By studying Raven's DNA, Trask's successors uncover the secret behind her shape-shifting ability. This discovery becomes the foundation for developing Sentinels capable of adapting to encountering virtually any mutant power. From there, the devastation begins. But the entire catastrophe can ultimately be traced back to one critical moment in the past. The team debates the dangers of time travel, knowing that the journey could be fatal for anyone without extraordinary healing abilities. Worse, changing the past could create unpredictable consequences. People who exist in the future might never be born, and events could unfold in completely unexpected ways. Despite the enormous risks, they believe it is their best chance to save the future. Wolverine awakens in 1973 inside a room filled with retro charm. When he steps outside, New York City feels strangely unfamiliar, a version of the city completely different from the one he knows. Meanwhile, in Washington, Dr. Trask presents the Sentinel Initiative to Congress. The politicians dismiss his concerns, arguing that mutants are too few to pose any real threat. Trask warns that mutants could eventually dominate humanity, but his proposal is rejected, leaving him frustrated yet determined to continue. In Saigon, Colonel Sanders inspects a group of mutant soldiers alongside Major William Stryker. Among them are Levac, Toad, and another unidentified mutant, all scheduled to be transferred to Trask Industries. But there is a shocking twist. Sanders is actually Mystique, secretly hiding her true identity beneath a human appearance. Wolverine travels to Xavier's mansion in search of Professor Xavier, only to find the place seemingly abandoned. Hank McCoy confronts him and orders him to leave, but the encounter quickly turns into a brutal fight. Hank transforms into his powerful blue beast form, and the two clash fiercely. Eventually, Wolverine meets Charles, who confirms that he has come from the future to stop the coming Sentinel uprising. They discuss how Raven's abilities were exploited to create the Sentinels and realize that Magneto's help will be essential. Wolverine also understands that Magneto is unlikely to abandon someone in need. However, He senses that something is wrong with Charles. Hank explains that Charles has become dependent on a special serum. While the serum allows him to walk again, it suppresses his telepathic abilities. The burden of his past has pushed Charles into despair. He has lost students in the Vietnam War, watched his school close, and struggled with the pain that followed. The serum has become his escape from that suffering. Although Charles is initially unwilling to listen, Wolverine slowly convinces him to understand the seriousness of the situation. Realizing how little time they have, they identify Magneto as the next key to changing history. He is being held deep beneath the Pentagon after allegedly assassinating President Kennedy, making his rescue their most urgent mission. Meanwhile, Mystique disguises herself as Dr. Trask and infiltrates his office at Trask Industries. She searches through confidential files and discovers detailed Sentinel schematics, along with disturbing autopsy reports documenting mutants who were used in Trask's experiments. As she studies the horrific reports, Mystique sees photographs of fallen mutants she once knew, including Azazel and Angel Salvador. The memories overwhelm her, and a silent tear rolls down her cheek as she confronts the reality of their deaths. Suddenly, Trask's secretary enters the office. Mystique immediately transforms back into Trask's appearance and calmly accepts the documents, leaving her cover completely intact. Meanwhile, Wolverine, Charles, and Hank set out to recruit Peter Maximoff, better known as Quicksilver. Wolverine explains their mission, but Peter initially treats the situation like a joke, teasing them about the danger. The moment Wolverine mentions breaking into the Pentagon, however, Peter's excitement takes over. His love of action and curiosity about the mission make him eager to join. Together, they infiltrate the heavily guarded Pentagon and successfully free Magneto from his secure prison cell. Quicksilver's incredible speed turns what should have been an impossible escape into an almost effortless operation, allowing him to race past guards and clear the way for the others. Once the mission is complete, Peter casually leaves the team and moves on, but the moment Magneto is free, tensions immediately rise. The old wounds between him and Charles come rushing back. Wolverine tries to explain that he has traveled from the future, but years of pain and betrayal stand between the two former friends. Charles accuses Magneto of abandoning their fellow mutants, while Magneto fires back, blaming Charles for giving up hope for their kind. Their argument reveals just how fragile their relationship has become. They desperately need one another, yet the trust between them has been badly damaged. The story then moves to Paris, where a lively nightclub is packed with music, soldiers, and political figures. Mystique, disguised as another person, scans the crowd and spots a Vietnamese general surrounded by officers and Russian soldiers. They laugh, drink, and enjoy themselves, completely unaware of the dangers standing nearby. The confident and careless general invites Mystique to his private quarters. As soon as the door closes, she reveals her true identity. With a swift and precise move, she takes him down and pins him to the floor, keeping her foot against his throat until he loses consciousness. While searching the room, Mystique notices a piece of paper containing an official invitation to an upcoming political summit in Paris. Without hesitation, she takes it, setting her next move into motion. High above the world aboard a private jet, Charles and Magneto pass the time playing chess. Their friendly game is more than simple entertainment. It reflects the complicated rivalry and history that continue to define their relationship. The board reflects their deeply conflicting philosophies. During the conversation, Magneto insists that he never killed President Kennedy, claiming instead that he tried to prevent the assassination. He even suggests that Kennedy himself may have been a mutant. The revelation makes their already fragile alliance even more complicated, planting seeds of doubt just as they prepare to work together. The day of the international summit finally arrives, and the stakes are higher than ever. Charles, Magneto, Hank, and Wolverine move through the building, searching for Mystique before she can make her move. Meanwhile, Dr. Bolivar Trask arrives with William Stryker, carrying classified Sentinel blueprints and a powerful device designed to detect anyone carrying the X gene. Chaos erupts when Mystique is spotted, turning the carefully planned operation into a public spectacle. Wolverine suddenly sees the younger Stryker, triggering painful memories of the suffering he will endure in the future. The shock disrupts his connection to the timeline and briefly leaves him shaken and unable to focus. The public display of mutant abilities sends shockwaves through the U.S. government. Inside the White House, Trask and Stryker brief President Nixon and other senior officials. Trask seizes the opportunity to argue that Mystique's abilities make her an unprecedented threat. She could impersonate a Secret Service agent or even the president and potentially use that access to launch a nuclear attack. His warning is fierce and uncompromising. Mutants are too dangerous to ignore, and capturing Mystique could be the key to stopping them. Convinced by his argument, Nixon approves the funding, officially giving the Sentinel program the green light. Soon afterward, Trask's scientists recover a sample of Mystique's blood from the streets. They believe her DNA contains the secret to creating adaptable Sentinels capable of countering virtually any mutant ability. Back at the mansion, Charles begins losing the use of his legs once again. However, this time his telepathy has returned. Hank retrieves the serum that can restore Charles's mobility, but the treatment would suppress his psychic abilities. Charles refuses the injection, knowing that his telepathy will be essential in the battle ahead. He returns to Cerebro, but the moment he connects, the full weight of the world crashes down on him. Pain, fear, grief, panic, and thousands of frightened voices flood his mind simultaneously. The overwhelming experience becomes too much. For a brief moment, Charles breaks down, convinced that he is not strong enough and that the future made a mistake by sending Wolverine instead of someone else. Wolverine reminds him that Charles was originally supposed to make the journey himself. However, his mind would never have survived the strain of traveling through time inside Wolverine's body. Logan was chosen for one reason: his extraordinary healing factor made him the only person capable of surviving the journey. Then, through Wolverine's consciousness, Charles experiences something extraordinary. He makes contact with his future self. The older Xavier speaks to him with calm wisdom, reminding the younger Charles that people can lose their way without being lost forever. He tells Charles that pain does not have to define the end of someone's story. More importantly, he reminds him that hope is their greatest strength. Those words break through Charles's fear and give him the courage to rise again, and not physically, but emotionally. Meanwhile, Magneto makes his own move. He infiltrates Trask Industries and discovers the Sentinel plans. Rather than destroying the machines, he decides to take control of them. As the Sentinels are transported by a train, Magneto tears metal from the tracks and forces it into their internal structures. By incorporating metal into the machines, he ensures that when the time comes, they will answer to him rather than the people who created them. In the dark future, Bobby comes up with a desperate plan. Kitty is growing weaker as she struggles to maintain the time connection with Wolverine. If she collapses, the entire mission will end. Bobby suggests finding Rogue, who is being held captive inside a heavily guarded facility. Because Rogue can absorb another mutant's powers, she may be able to take over Kitty's role and keep Wolverine anchored in the past. Magneto agrees, and they head toward the facility, hoping they have not arrived too late. Back in 1973, Charles finds the strength to use Cerebro once again. This time, he locates Mystique at an airport. Unable to communicate with her directly, he reaches her through the people around her. Using the bystanders as his voice, he pleads with her to stop before she crosses a line that will shape the future through bloodshed. But Mystique refuses to listen. She believes killing Trask is the only way to protect mutantkind through another person's eyes. Charles notices her ticket and realizes that she is heading to Washington. The day of the Sentinel demonstration finally arrives. President Nixon prepares to unveil the machines to the world, presenting them as humanity's answer to the mutant threat. Wolverine, Charles, and Hank arrive as well, racing against time to find Mystique before she can assassinate Trask. As Nixon delivers his speech, Magneto makes a terrifying entrance, using his powers on an enormous scale. He lifts RFK Stadium from its foundation and carries it across the city before dropping it around the White House like a gigantic metal fortress. The event instantly descends into chaos. People scream, security forces panic, and the entire nation watches in horror. Amid the confusion, Charles searches for Mystique and discovers that she's disguised as a Secret Service agent. She is close to Trask, armed and ready to pull the trigger. Charles reaches into her mind, desperately trying to stop her before history repeats itself. At the same time, Magneto activates the modified Sentinels and turns them against the humans who created them. He uses the attack as a warning to the world, demonstrating what mutants can do when they are pushed too far, but his actions only reinforce the fears that Trask had been spreading. His display becomes the perfect argument for those who believe mutants are a threat. As destruction spreads, Hank fights desperately against the Sentinels while Wolverine goes after Magneto. Logan tries to stop him, but Magneto is far too powerful. He tears metal rods through Wolverine's body and hurls him into the water, pinning him beneath the surface. Logan sinks helplessly below as the battle continues to spiral out of control. Mystique, still disguised as a Secret Service agent, gets close enough to act. But instead of killing Trask, she turns her weapon toward Magneto and shoots him, stopping his attack and saving Nixon and the others. Charles then speaks to her one final time. He asks her not to allow anger to determine her future. He reminds her that destiny is not already written and that she still has the power to choose who she becomes. In that crucial moment, Mystique lowers her weapon. She chooses not to kill Trask. That single decision changes everything. Instead of being remembered as the mutant who murdered a government scientist and confirmed humanity's worst fears, Mystique becomes the mutant who saved the president. The world witnesses a completely different story. Fear surrounding mutants begins to fade, and support for the Sentinel program collapses before it can create the nightmare future. Magneto escapes, and Mystique disappears as well. Charles allows them both to leave, not because he agrees with their choices, but because he still believes they may someday find their way back. Then Wolverine wakes up at the Xavier Institute, but this is not the ruined future he left behind. The world has changed. The halls are alive again, filled with students and familiar faces. People Logan once watched are now alive. Iceman, Rogue, Kitty, Colossus, and Storm are all there, living normal lives and helping teach the next generation. Even an older Hank McCoy welcomes him warmly. But the biggest shock comes when Wolverine sees Jean Grey. She is alive, standing there as if the tragedy Logan remembers never happened. Cyclops is with her, too. The painful future Logan carried in his mind has been erased. Charles welcomes him back and gently tells him that they have a lot to catch up on. He then asks Logan what he remembers from the old timeline. Wolverine says the last thing he remembers is drowning. He recalls being pulled from the water by Stryker and his soldiers, but the final reveal changes everything. Stryker's eyes suddenly flash yellow, exposing the truth. It was never really Stryker who found Wolverine and saved him, it was Mystique. There are some superhero movies that simply continue a franchise. Then there are movies that arrive carrying a toolbox, a broom, a first aid kit, and maybe even a time machine because the entire series needs fixing. X-Men, Days of Future Past is definitely the second kind of movie. This isn't just another chapter where mutants appear. Superpowers explode across the screen, buildings come crashing down, and we sit around waiting for the next sequel tease. Sure, all of that is here too, But this movie has a much bigger responsibility than the average blockbuster. It has to connect two different generations of X-Men films. It has to bring back the original cast without making their return feel like cheap nostalgia. It has to continue the first-class storyline, deal with the problems left behind by some of the franchise's weaker entries, and somehow still function as a satisfying movie on its own. That's what makes the film so impressive. On paper, this could have been a complete disaster. You have the original cast, the younger cast, time travel, Sentinels, Mystique, Wolverine, two versions of Professor X, two versions of Magneto, and years of franchise baggage hanging over everything. One wrong move, and the whole thing could have felt like a crowded Comic-Con panel with a plot attached. But Days of Future Past understands something very important. The story matters because the franchise itself is at a breaking point. The future shown in the movie is broken. Mutants are being hunted, the world has become a nightmare, and hope is almost gone. In a strange way, though, the X-Men film series also feels like it is trying to escape its own damaged timeline. The movie isn't simply asking, can these characters change the future? It's also quietly asking, can this franchise save itself? That gives the film an extra layer of energy. It becomes a rescue mission on two levels. Wolverine is fighting to save mutants from extinction, while the movie itself is trying to save the X-Men series from being trapped by its own past mistakes. That idea could easily have felt cheap. The filmmakers could have simply pressed a reset button and hoped the audience wouldn't notice. Instead, it feels surprisingly exciting. Maybe that's because the film doesn't try to escape the weight of everything that came before. It embraces it. It takes the old cast, the new cast, the mistakes, the emotional history, and the expectations of longtime fans and throws them all into one story about regret, fear, survival, and second chances. That's why Days of Future Past matters. It's not just big. It's not just stylish, and it's not simply another superhero sequel trying to convince us that it's important. It's one of those rare franchise movies that understands exactly how much is riding on its shoulders and, even better, actually rises to the challenge. Before getting into Days of Future Past, though, it's worth looking at where the X-Men movies stood at this point, because the franchise had already been through a lot. The first X-Men was a strong beginning. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't nearly as massive as superhero movies would eventually become, but it had something special. It featured a talented cast, a serious tone, and enough confidence to make these characters feel like they truly belonged on the big screen. At the same time, you could still sense the movie searching for its full identity. It was almost as if the franchise was standing at the doorway, not quite ready to step inside. Then X2 arrives, and that's where the series really clicked. X2 took the foundation of the first film and made almost everything sharper, bigger action, a darker atmosphere, stronger emotional stakes, and a much clearer understanding of what the X-Men universe could become. For many fans, that was the moment when the franchise stopped feeling like a promising experiment and started feeling like something genuinely special. But after that, things got messy. X-Men: The Last Stand is one of those movies where I can understand why some people still defend certain aspects of it. It has its moments, the scale is larger, some of the visuals work, and several performances still carry real weight. Some of the action sequences are genuinely entertaining on their own. The problem is that the movie tries to handle too much at once. There are too many characters, too many storylines, and too many major emotional developments that don't get enough time to breathe. Instead of feeling truly epic, the movie often feels rushed and overcrowded. Characters who should have been important are either underdeveloped, pushed aside, or written in ways that don't quite match what made them interesting in the first place. It's not completely without value, but it is a clear step down from where the franchise had been. Then came X-Men Origins, Wolverine, and honestly, that didn't do much to improve the situation. Again, there are pieces of the movie that had potential. Hugh Jackman still had a strong grip on the character, and some of the ideas could have worked with a cleaner script and more focused storytelling. But the movie suffered from many of the same problems as The Last Stand. It had ambitious ideas, but the execution often struggled to bring them together in a satisfying way. Too much noise, not enough control, and the characters who felt more like pieces being thrown at the screen than people being properly explored. The Wolverine was better. Definitely better. I'd brought things down a little, gave Logan a more focused story, and showed that the character could still carry a film when the material had some shape to it, but even then, it wasn't flawless. I'd improved the mood around the franchise, but it didn't completely erase the damage. And then First Class came along, which was honestly the refresh the series needed. By going back to younger versions of Charles and Derek, the movie found a new angle. Didn't feel like I was just dragging the old series forward out of obligation. It had energy, style, and a cast that made the familiar characters feel alive again. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender gave the franchise something it badly needed, a reason to care about where the story could go next. So, by the time Days of Future Past arrives, the X-Men series is in this strange position. It has a history, but also baggage. It has beloved characters, but also damaged continuity. It has one of the strongest superhero sequels in so, but also some entries that left fans frustrated. And that is what makes Days of Future Past so interesting. It doesn't come into a clean franchise. It comes into a franchise with scars, some good memories, some bad decisions, some brilliant casting, some wasted potential. So, the movie isn't just continuing the X-Men story. It's walking into the middle of a complicated family argument and somehow trying to make everyone sit at the same table again. So, going into Days of Future Past, expectations were complicated to say the least. On one hand, Bryan Singer was back in the director's chair, and for anyone who loved Zoe, that was huge news. The guy has a knack for balancing big action with a character-driven drama. That alone made people sit up and pay attention. Then there's the cast. Oh boy, the cast. The movie promised a mashup of the old guard, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Hugh Jackman, and the younger generation from First Class like James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, and fans were understandably nervous. Mixing two generations of characters can be messy. You risk underusing some, overshadowing others, or just creating this weird crowd scene where nobody has a real moment. And don't forget the Sentinels, giant unstoppable mutant killing robots. That alone made some people giddy with anticipation. Finally, a villain with actual stakes. Fiza wasn't just some random antagonist in a leather coat. These things were terrifying, adaptive, and a legitimate threat. The comic book angle added another layer. One of the most famous storylines in X-Men history was being adapted. People who had been reading the comics for decades were bracing themselves. Would it honor the source material or butcher it for the screen? So, excitement was high, but so was caution. Some viewers were pumped, expecting a franchise-defining a spectacle. Others were wary, thinking, okay, can they really pull this off without it turning into a cluttered mess? And then there were people like you and me, not die-hard comic experts, but long-time fans of the movies who were hoping for just one thing, a film that respected the history of the series while giving us something thrilling to watch. Not a simple continuation, not just another superhero blockbuster, but something that could actually feel important. Honestly, walking into the theater, that was the vibe. Equal parts anticipation, curiosity, and a touch of please don't screw this up. The basic setup of a Days of Future Past is actually pretty simple. Even though the movie around it is carrying a lot of franchisee baggage, in the future, everything has gone wrong. Mutants are being hunted down by Sentinels, these advanced robotic weapons built to track them, adapt to them, and wipe them out. And it's not just mutants, either. Humans who helped mutants, protected them, or stood beside them are also caught in the destruction. So, right away, the movie gives you a future that feels less like a warning and more like the aftermath of a war nobody really won. The surviving X-Men are barely holding on. Professors and Magneto, who have spent so much of this series on opposite sides, are now working together because the situation has become that desperate. Old grudges that don't mean much when extinction is knocking at the door. Their plan is risky, but at this point, risk is all they have left. Kitty Pryde uses her ability to send Wolverine's consciousness back into his younger body in 1973. Not his whole body. Not a clean little time machine trip, but his mind thrown back into the past while his future body stays behind. Wolverine is chosen because he can physically survive via the damage of the process. Basically, if anyone can handle having his brain dragged across decades. Its slogan. His mission sounds straightforward. Find the younger Charles Xavier, free the under Magneto, and stop Mystique from killing Oliver Traz. But of course, nothing about that is actually easy. Traz is the man behind the Sentinel program, and the Mystique's assassination attempt becomes the key event that pushes history toward a disaster. Her DNA is later used to make the Sentinels even more dangerous, giving them the ability to adapt against mutant powers. So, one violent act in the past becomes the beginning of a nightmare future. That's the hook. Wolverine has to walk into 1973 and convince people who don't know him, don't trust each other, and in some cases can barely hold themselves together that the future depends on them making a different choice. And that's where the movie becomes more interesting than just go back in time and stop the bad thing, because the mission is not only about changing an event. It's about changing people before they become trapped by anger, fear, and regret. Alright, let's talk about the future in Days of Future Past. And by future, I mean apocalyptic. Everything is on fire. The world is finished. Future. The movie opens with a timeline where things have gone horribly wrong. Mutants have been hunted to near extinction. Humans who help them aren't safe either. And the world feels cold, grim, and hopeless. You can feel immediately that this isn't just a setup for a fight scene. It's a real high-stakes disaster. And that's where the Sentinels come in. These things aren't your average CGI goons. They're gigantic, adaptive, and terrifying. They learn from every encounter, anticipate mutant powers, and basically make survival feel impossible. Watching them tear through mutant scene of the opening battle, brutal. It's a reminder that the stakes here are life and death, not just superhero showboating. What's cool is that the Sentinels aren't just big robots with guns. They represent something bigger, fear turned into technology, prejudice weaponized. The idea that the world's hatred can manifest as a literal machine capable of wiping out those who are different. The threat feels real because it's relentless and methodical. Every scene in the future timeline reminds you that if Wolverine doesn't succeed, everything is lost. It's also visually stunning. The ruined cityscapes, the barren streets, the destroyed buildings, it all screams dystopia without needing exposition. You don't have to be told that humanity and mutants are on the brink. You can see it, and that makes the stakes in the past timeline hit even harder. So yeah, the future is grim, but it works perfectly as motivation for a Wolverine, Xavier, Magneto, and everyone else. It's urgent, it's terrifying, and it's one of the reasons the movie grabs you from the first frame and doesn't let it go. The time travel idea in Days of Future Past is not exactly new. Let's be honest about that. The whole go back into the past to stop a terrible future from happening setup has been around for a long time. The moment the movie explains its plan, you can almost feel the shadow of other sci-fi stories hanging over it. A ruined future, only a desperate mission. One person sent back to change the event that started everything. It is familiar territory, but familiar does not automatically mean weak. What matters is how the movie uses that idea, and Days of Future Past uses it surprisingly well. It doesn't overcomplicate the basic hook. The future is destroyed. The Sentinels area winning. Mystique's actions in 1973 area the trigger point. Wolverine has to go back and stop the chain reaction before it becomes impossible to undo. Simply enough. And honestly, that simplicity helps the film because there is already so much happening. Two casts, two timelines, old relationships, broken friendships, political tension, mutant extinction, franchise history. The time travel concept needed to be clear. If the movie had buried itself in rules and technical explanations, it could have become exhausting very quickly. Instead, it gives us just enough. Kitty can send a Wolverine's consciousness back. His body stays in the future. If things go wrong in either timeline, the mission collapses. That's all we really need to understand. The movie doesn't ask us to spend the whole runtime drawing diagrams in our head. It wants us focused on the characters, not trapped in time travel homework. Now, does the logic hold up perfectly if you start pulling at every thread? Not really. There are questions. There are convenience points. There are area moments where the movie clearly cares more about emotional payoff than strict causality. And depending on how picky you are with time travel stories, that might bother you a little or a lot. For me, the film gets away with it because the premise is clean and the emotional stakes are strong. The time travel is not just there as a gimmick. It gives the characters a second chance. It lets the franchise look backward and forward at the same time. It turns past mistakes both inside the story and honestly within the series itself into something the movie can actually confront. So yes, the concept is familiar. You have seen versions of these before. But Days of Future Past takes that old sci-fi skeleton and gives it enough energy, tension, and character weight that it still feels alive. The structure of Days of Future Past could have been a complete headache. Just look at what this movie is trying to juggle. You have a ruined future, a 1970s mission, the original X-Men cast, the first-class cast, Wolverine's consciousness stuck between timelines, a Mystique's assassination plot, Trask in the Sentinel program, Charles Xavier at his lowest point, Magneto to Magneto things, and a whole bunch of failed mutants appearing in different corners of the story. That is not a small plate. And for the first few minutes, I can understand someone feeling a little lost. The movie throws you into the dark future where characters are already fighting, already hiding, already using powers in ways that are not fully explained. If you haven't watched the earlier films recently, or if you only half remember who everyone is, it can take a moment to settle in. But once the central mission becomes clear, the movie finds its rhythm. The smart thing is that the film doesn't try to give equal weight to absolutely everyone. It knows that the story has two timelines, but it also knows where the emotional focus needs to be. The future timeline gives us urgency. It shows us what happens if the mission fails. The past timeline gives us the actual drama. Broken Charles, a dangerous Eric, conflicted Mystique, and a Wolverine trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart. That balance helps a lot. Instead of constantly jumping around just for the sake of it, the movie uses the future like pressure. Every time we return there, we're reminded that time is running out. The Sentinels are closing in. The survivors are barely holding on. Meanwhile, in the past, Every mistake feels heavier because we already know where it leads. Still, this is definitely not the easiest X-Men film to walk into cold. There are names, faces, powers, histories, and relationships that the movie expects you to understand, but at least a little. It doesn't stop every 5 minutes to explain everything. And honestly, I respect that, but it also means casual viewers might feel like they walked into a family argument halfway through dinner. Everyone knows why they're mad except you. And somehow the film mostly keeps things readable. The plot is dense but not impossible. The timeline's complicated but not completely tangled. The movie gives you a clear emotional line to follow. Stop Mystique, save the future and bring Charles back from the edge. As long as you hold on to that, the rest of the moving parts become easier to ride with. Are there moments where the structure gets a little messy? Sure, a few. Especially when you start to thinking too hard about continuity and a cause and effect, but as a viewing experience, the film moves with an confidence that you don't spend the whole time fighting the timeline, and that's probably the biggest compliment you can give it. For a movie built out of 2 eras, 2 casts, and several layers of franchise history, Days of Future Past rarely feels like homework. It feels busy, yes, sometimes very busy, but it also feels controlled. And that control is what keeps the complexity from swallowing the movie whole. One of the funniest things about Days of Future Past is that beneath all the Sentinels and time travel and mutant drama, the movie is basically doing franchisee cleanup, and not quietly either. By this point, the X-Men timeline had become, let's call it, complicated. That's the polite word. You had the original trilogy, then the Wolverine spin-offs, then First Class, which felt like a prequel, but also didn't line up perfectly with everything we already knew. Then there was The Last Stand, a movie that made some very big choices and left the series with a lot of damage to carry. So Days of Future Past comes in and says, okay, what if we just used time travel to deal with all of this? And honestly, that could have felt lazy. It could have felt like the studio pressing a giant reset button because the timeline had become too messy to manage in some ways. Yes, that is kind of what happens. The movie is absolutely trying to repair the franchise. Trying to smooth over old problems, reconnect the old cast with a new cast, and give the series a cleaner path forward. But the reason it works is that the repair job is built into the story. The characters are trying to change a terrible future, and at the same time, the film itself is trying to change the future of the franchise. That parallel gives the whole thing a weirdly satisfying energy. It doesn't feel like a random retcon slapped onto the end. It feels like the movie is making the franchise's own broken history part of the drama, and that's pretty clever because instead of pretending the previous films didn't happen, Days of Future Past uses them. It brings back the emotional weight of the original cast. It continues the younger cast from First Class. It acknowledges that things have gone wrong both in the world of the movie and honestly in the series itself. Then it tries to bend the timeline into something more hopeful. Does it fix everything perfectly? No. Not even close. There are still continuity questions. Some details do not line up cleanly. Some things are ignored. Some new problems are created while others are being solved. If you start mapping the whole timeline on a wall with red string, you will probably lose your mind before the second cup of coffee. But in the moment, the emotional effect is strong enough that most of those issues don't completely break the movie. It feels less like a reboot and more like a correction, a soft reset, but with actual character stakes behind it. The film is not just erasing events because they were inconvenient. It is asking whether the worst possible outcome can still be avoided if people make different choices. That's why the retconning goes down easier than it probably should. By the end, Days of Future Past manages to make franchisee maintenance feel dramatic. That sounds ridiculous, but it's true. It takes a messy continuity, old mistakes, honest frustration, and years of uneven storytelling and turns all of it into a part of the film's identity. It's not seamless. It's not completely logical, but it is surprisingly satisfying, and for a series that badly needed a way out of its own timeline, that's a pretty big win. Now, for the comic book fans out there, Days of Future Past is interesting because it's not a straight adaptation. Sure, the movie borrows its name and the broad time travel idea from one of the most famous X-Men storylines. You know, the one the future is a nightmare. Someone has to go back and fix it arc that's been a fan favorite for decades. But don't expect panel for panel accuracy here. The filmmakers took the essence of that story and used it as a framework to fix the movie universe. A lot of details are changed. Some characters are emphasized differently and the timeline gets tweaked to connect the older cast with the younger cast. Wolverine is front and center, which makes sense for the screen but isn't exactly what the comic focused on. Mystique has a much bigger role. The Sentinels look different and the story mixes a lot of historical flavor within the classic sci-fi premise. But here's the thing, it works. The movie isn't trying to be a page-for-page comic adaptation. It's using the comic as a springboard to tell a cinematic story that satisfies longtime fans while also being accessible to casual viewers. It gives you the thrill of seeing your favorite arcs come to life, but it also plays with the material in clever ways, bending history, merging timelines, and giving characters moments they didn't have on the page. You could argue it takes liberties, and it does. Instead of feeling disrespectful to the source material, it feels like it's honoring the spirit of it. The moral stakes, the mutant versus human tension, the idea that one choice can change everything. Those core ideas are intact. Everything else, well, the filmmakers molded it for the screen, and the result is surprisingly satisfying. In short, comic fans get the nods, the Easter eggs, and the core drama they love without the movie getting bogged down in trying to be a literal adaptation. It's clever, it's ambitious, and it actually feels like it knows what makes the X-Men comics special in the first place. Bryan Singer's return is a big part of why Days of Future Past feels as controlled as it does, because honestly, this movie could have gone off the rails very easily. You have two timelines, two generations of actors, a dystopia and a future, a 1970s political thriller angle, Wolverine jumping through time, a Mystique carrying the fate of the world, a Magneto doing whatever Magneto wants, and a whole pile of franchise baggage is sitting in the corner. That is a lot of fan material in the wrong hands. It could have turned into a loud, overstated mess. But Singer brings a kind of discipline back to the series. He doesn't make the film feel small. Exactly. The scale is huge, the stakes are huge, the action can be massive when it wants to be. But there's still a sense that someone is keeping the story on a leash. The movie has spectacle, but it rarely feels like a spectacle is driving the bus. The character drama is still in charge. That's the thing Singer understands about X-Men when he's at his best. These films are not interesting only because mutants can throw metal, open portals, read minds, or heal from anything. The powers are fun, sure. That's part of the appeal, but the real win comes from the people underneath all that. Their fear, their anger, their loneliness, and their need to belong somewhere, and Days of Future Past keeps returning to that. The future scenes are dark and brutal, but they don't just exist for action. The 1970s scenes have political tension, but they don't become dry exposition. Charles' pain matters. Eric's distrust matters. Mystique's anger matters. Even a Wolverine, who can easily dominate the whole film, is used more like a bridgia than a blunt instrument. Singer also knows when to slow down. That's important. A lot of superhero movies are terrified of silence. They keep rushing, joking, exploding, cutting, moving, anything to avoid letting a scene breathe. But here, some of the strongest moments are the quieter ones. The conversation between the two Zavers, for example, is not flashy, but it gives the movie emotional gravity. And they know when the action comes, it lands harder because the film hasn't been screaming at you the whole time. The pacing is sharp, too, for a movie this packed. Ida moves cleanly. There's not much dead weight. It has room for humor, room for attention, room for big comic book imagery, but it doesn't feel like every character is fighting for their own separate movie. That's probably the biggest compliment to Singer's direction here. He makes a complicated crossover feel surprisingly focused. Not perfect, no. Some logic still bends, some characters are still underserved. The timeline stuff can still make your head hurt if you stare at it too long, but also a piece of direction. This is a confident return. Singer takes a franchise that had become messy and gives it shape again. He brings back the darker tone, the emotional seriousness, in that sense that the X-Men world is about more than costumes and powers. Ida feels like he knows the material. More importantly, it feels like he knows why it matters. The screenplay for Days of Future Past deserves more credit than Ida probably gets because this is the kind of story that could collapse from its own weight. Just think about the ingredients for a second. A Destroy the Future, a mission in 1973. Wolverine acting as the link between timelines. Young Charles Xavier at rock bottom. Magneto locked away, then released into a mission where nobody fully trusts him. Mystique becoming the key to everything. Draz building the Sentinel program. The older cast waiting in the future. The younger cast carrying most of the drama. And somehow all of this has to feel like one movie. That is not easy writing. What's impressive is that the script usually knows where to put its attention. It doesn't try to make every character equally important because that it would be impossible. Instead, it gives the story a clear spine. Stop Mystique, save the future, and bring Charles back to himself before history hardens into a tragedy. That simple emotional linear keeps the movie readable. The dialogue also does more than just explain the plot. There is exposition, obviously. A movie like this needs it. But the better scenes are built around character tension. Charles and Eric don't just talk about the mission. They reveal how differently they see the world. Wolverine doesn't just deliver warnings from the future. He has to push people who are angry, broken, or stubborn into believing something they can prove. Mystique doesn't need long speeches to show where she is emotionally. Her choices tell us enough. That's where the narrative balance works best. The film has humor, but it doesn't overdo it. Ida has suspense, but it doesn't become joyless. It has big action, but the action usually comes out of character conflict rather than feeling pasted on. Even the franchise repair work is folded into the story instead of stopping the movie dead for continuity housekeeping. Still, the script is not bulletproof. Some decisions feel a little too convenient. There are moments where characters behave in ways that seem designed mainly to extend the conflict. The time travel logic gets shaky if you start examining it too closely, and by the final stretch, you can feel the movie asking you to accept emotion over a clean cause and effect. But honestly, for a film carrying this much baggage, the writing holds together better than expected. It gives the audience enough clarity to follow the mission, enough character drama to care about the outcome, and enough momentum to keep the whole thing from feeling like a lecture on X-Men continuity. That's the real achievement of the screenplay. It takes a story that could have been messy, crowded, and exhausting, and turns it into something surprisingly smooth, flawless. Not perfectly logical, Wood is sharp enough, focused enough, and emotionally strong enough to make the chaos feel controlled. The tone of Days of Future Past is one of the reasons it stands apart from a lot of superhero movies. This is not a bright, jokey, everyone is having fun kind of comic book film. It opens in a future where mutants are basically being wiped off of the map. The world is ruined. The heroes are desperate and the whole story has this heavy feeling hanging over it from the start. You don't get the sense that these characters are just waiting for the next cool fight scene. You get the sense that they are exhausted, and you like that because X-Men has always worked best when there is sadness underneath the spectacle. The characters are not just people with the powers, they are people who have been feared, rejected, hunted, used, and misunderstood. So when a movie leans into a darker, more serious atmosphere, it feels appropriate, it fits the material. But what keeps the film from becoming too miserable is that it still knows how to breathe. There is humor here, just not the loud, constant kind. The movie doesn't stop every few minutes to throw in a punchline. It lets the serious moments stay serious. When Charles is broken, the film doesn't immediately undercut it with a joke. When the future timeline shows the Sentinels tearing through mutants, it doesn't wink at the audience. It lets the danger feel ugly. Then, when humor does arrive, it actually lands. Quicksilver is the obvious example. His scenes bring this strange little spark into the movie. Suddenly, the film loosens its shoulders a bit. The prison escape sequence is playful with how the feeling out of place, and that is harder to pull off than it looks. It gives the audience a release, but it doesn't destroy the tension of the larger story. The 1970s setting helps, too. The costumes, the period details, the little touches of style, they add some cheekiness to the movie without turning it into a parody. There is a bit of fun in the texture of that world, even when the story itself is dealing with fear, violence, and political paranoia. That balance is important. If the movie were all darkness, it might become draining. If it were too light, the future threat would lose its power. Days of Future Past finds a middle ground. Serious, yes, intense, definitely, sometimes brutal, but not empty, not cold, and not humorless. It understands that a superhero movie can have weight without becoming boring. And honestly, that is a part of why the emotional moments work. The film gives pain room to exist, but it also gives us just enough wit and energy to keep the story alive. One of the things I really appreciated about Days of Future Past is how it grounds its story in a political and historical backdrop without ever feeling like a history lesson. Most superhero movies don't bother with that. They're happy creating their own universe and ignoring the real world. But here, the filmmakers leaned into 1973 in a way that actually adds texture to the story. Nixon-era politics, the tail end of the Vietnam War, even small period details like costumes, decor, and cultural references. It all makes the world feel lived in. It works on two levels. First, it gives the past timeline a sense of authenticity. The tension in that era, distrust, paranoia, political maneuvering, mirrors the fear and xenophobia the mutants are facing. You can't just paint mutants as the victims in a vacuum. The world they exist in is complicated and the movie shows that. Second, it gives stakes to the time travel element. The events that a Wolverine has to prevent are happening in a blank space. They're reoccurring in a real historical context. Which makes the consequences feel heavier. Mystique's actions don't just endanger mutants. They intersect with the governments, the military, and even historical events, which amplifies the urgency. The film even plays with real-life figures in a fun, ironic way. It's subtle, nothing too distracting, but it's enough to make you realize the past isn't just a backdrop. It's an active part of the story. and it's a clever way of making the world feel bigger without adding endless exposition. You're aware of what's going on politically and socially, and it shapes the choices the characters make, often in ways that feel organic rather than shoehorned in. So, yeah, the historical and political grounding adds depth. It gives the past a timeline weight and context, and it's another reason the movie feels more ambitious and intelligent than your standard superhero flick. One of the things that always sets the X-Men movies apart, and Days of Future Past really leans into it, is how the story reflects the real-world issues through the lens of mutants. At its core, this is a movie about fear of the unknown, fear of a difference, fear of what people don't understand. That fear manifests seen as xenophobia, oppression, and ultimately the hunt for mutants. The Sentinels aren't just robots, they're a symbol of a society trying to control or erase what it fears, and the humans who help the mutants, they get caught in that same wave of hate. Survival becomes the central concern. The mutants aren't just fighting to save the world. They're fighting to save themselves and each other. Every decision, every fight, every morally gray choice is colored by the fact that they could all be wiped out in a moment. It's tense, it's dark, and it gives the action real stakes. What's clever is that the movie doesn't just show fear and oppression as external forces. It's internal, too. Charles struggles with despair, Erica with anger and resentment, Mystique with her identity and how the world sees her. Their choices are influenced by trauma and prejudice just as much as the Sentinels or governments around them. That layering makes the story feel more meaningful than a standard heroes versus villains setup. You're not just watching explosions and powers, you're watching a group of outsiders navigating a world that hates them, trying to find a way to survive while making moral choices in a nearly impossible situation. And in a way, it's a subtle nod to real life. People who are different, marginalized, or misunderstood often have to fight for survival, too, whether socially, politically, or personally. The film uses mutants as a lens, but the emotions are universal. So, while there's plenty of action, Days of Future Past turns its way through these themes. Fear, xenophobia, oppression, survival, all threaded through the story so that the battles feel meaningful and the stakes feel real. One thing that really surprised me about Days of Future Past is how much it trusts its drama instead of just throwing endless action at the screen. I mean, sure, the action is there. Giant sentinels, mutant powers going haywire, Wolverine fighting into timelines at once, Quicksilver bending reality in slow motion. It's all visually spectacular. But what makes it actually work is that the action always comes out of the story, not the other way around. The battles aren't just about seeing who can punch the hardest or blast the most energy. They're about the characters, their fears, their grudges, and the consequences of their choices. When Charles and Eric argue, or when Mystique makes a life or death decision, the movie lets those moments breathe. And then the action flows naturally from it. You feel the stakes in every explosion because it's tied to the people on screen. Even Wolverine, who could have easily carried the movie with just his fighting, is mostly a bloated driver. His battles are exciting, yes, but they're framed by tension, desperation, and emotion that makes you care. If the movie had just been one set piece after another without giving you the human side, it would have been exhausting. Instead, it's thrilling because you're invested in why it matters. And honestly, that's a rare thing in modern superhero films. So many blockbusters forget to let the characters lead and just try to impress with spectacle. Days of Future Past manages to balance both. The action is big, but the drama never takes a backseat. That's what makes the movie feel grounded, even when the timelines are messy and the robots are huge. Every fight, every chase, Every slow motion sequence matters because it's tied to someone's hope, fear, or moral choice, and that's the kind of balance that keeps you glued to the screen for 2+ hours without feeling like your brain is on autopilot. The real emotional center of Days of Future Past is not the time travel. It is not even a Wolverine, even though he is the only carrying the mission on his back. The heart of the movie is really Charles, Eric, and Mystique, that triangle is where the film gets its weight. These are not just three characters standing around the plot, their choices are the plot. The future becomes a nightmare because of what happens between them, what they believe, what they fear, and what they are willing to do when the world keeps pushing them into corners. Charles especially is in a rough place here. This is not the calm professor that we usually picture. He is not sitting in a chair with wisdom in his voice and a hope in his eyes. He is broken, angry, tired. He has stepped away from his power, from his purpose, from the dream that was supposed to define him. And James McAvoy plays that pain in a way that feels raw without becoming overdone. You can see the future Professor X somewhere inside him, Buddha buried under grief and failure. Then you have Eric, who is almost the opposite problem. Magneto has not lost belief. If anything, he believes too strongly. He believes fear must be answered with a force. He believes humans will always turn against mutants. He believes survival means taking control before someone else does. Fassbender gives him that dangerous calm, that quiet certainty, like a man who has already decided history will prove him right. And between them is Mystique. Raven is the one whose decision can change everything. She is hurt, angry, and tired of being hunted. Her revenge feels personal, but the consequences become global. That is what makes her role interesting. She is not just a villainette to be stopped. She is someone standing at the edge of becoming a symbol other people will use, twist, and weaponize. So the movie is not simply asking, can they stop Mystique? It is asking, can Charles still reach her? Can Eric resist turning every problem into a show of power? Can Raven choose something other than revenge before history locks her into that choice forever? That is where the drama comes from. The best scenes are not always the loud ones. Sometimes it is just Charles looking like he has given up on the world, or Eric making the exact ruthless decision you hoped he would not make, or Mystique hesitating for half a second and that half second carrying the future inside it. That is why this trio works so well. They each represent a different response to fear. Charles is wounded hope, Eric is controlled rage, Mystique is pain looking for direction, and Days of Future Past understands that the fate of the world does not just depend on stopping the machines. It depends on whether the three people can stop destroying each other long enough to choose a different future. Wolverine is in a strange position in Days of Future Past. He is technically the lead. He is the one sent back. He is the one who has to find Charles, break Magneto out, track Mystique, and somehow convince everyone that the future is already burning. So, yes, the whole mission moves because of him. But emotionally this is not really a Wolverine's deepest character movie. And honestly, that works. By this point, Hugh Jackman has played Logan so many times that the film does not need to reintroduce him or explain why he matters. He walks into a scene and immediately brings that rough, tired, sarcastic presence with him. You believe him as the guy who has seen too much, survived too much. It is still the only person stubborn enough to keep going. That makes him the perfect anchor for a story this complicated. The movie has two timelines, two casts, old grudges, future extinction, 1970s politics, and a lot of mutant hysteria flying around. Wolverine gives the audience something familiar to hold on to. He is our way into the chaos. When the plot starts moving through time and continuity, Logan is the steady piece in the middle. But the smart thing is that the movie does not make him swallow everything around him. He could have easily dominated the film. The franchise has leaned on Wolverine before, sometimes too much, but here, even though he drives the plot, he leaves the room for Charles, Eric, and Mystique to carry the emotional weight. He is noted the one with the biggest internal transformation. He is the messenger, Thea warning signal, the guy from Thea Nightmare Future trying to shake Thea past awake, and there is something quietly interesting about that. Wolverine is usually the fighter, Thea clawed up solution. The one you sent into the room when subtlety has already died. But in this movie, his real job is not just to fight. It is to convince. He has to walk up to a broken Charles Xavier and say, basically, you don't know me, but I need you to become the man you're supposed to be. That is a different kind of pressure. Jackman plays that well. He still has the gruff humor, the physical presence, the little flashes of irritation that make Logan fun to watch, but there is also a more subdued quality here. He is not just angry, he is carrying the weight of a future no one else can see yet. So, a Wild Days of Future Past does not give Wolverine a massive personal arc. Ida uses him exactly where he is strongest. He connects the old cast to the new cast. He keeps the story moving. He gives the audience a familiar face in a very busy film. And maybe most importantly, he steps back just enough to let the real emotional damage happen around him. That is why his role works. He is not the heart of the movie the time. He is the spine. One of the boldest things Days of Future Past does is bring together two generations of X-Men, the old cast and the new cast, and somehow make it feel natural. These is tricky. Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, and Hugh Jackman have been around for over a decade in these roles. They carry a ton of history with them. Then you throw in James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hall, and a bunch of younger mutants from First Class, and you suddenly have a room full of people who all want screen time. The potential for chaos is huge, but Singer and the script manage it surprisingly well. The older cast mostly stays in the background, lending their weight without hogging the spotlight. Stewart and McKellen, as usual, are perfectly measured, bringing gravitas to scenes that could have felt overstuffed. Jackman bridges the gap, giving the new cast someone familiar to bounce off. Meanwhile, the younger cast gets room to grow. McAvoy's broken Charles Xavier, Fassbender's calculating young Magneto, and Lawrence's conflicted Mystique carry the emotional anchors for the past timeline. They carry the tension and the stakes of the story while the older actors provide context, history, and a perspective. The transition between the two eras feels deliberate, not forced. You don't get the sense that the old cast is there just for nostalgia or that the young cast is a cheap replacement. They interact meaningfully. Their relationships, Charles and Eric, Logan and Charles, Mystique, and both Xavier feel real and earned. Even smaller characters get their moments without derailing the story. Cameos from Storm, Iceman, and others are sprinkled in strategically. Some characters could have been given more, sure, or barely shows up, and some of the future mutants feel like fan service, but the balance mostly works. It's the kind of ensemble juggling that could easily have fallen apart, but instead, it gives the film energy. You get a sense of the franchise's legacy, the continuity of its characters, and the passing of the torch from one generation to the next. In short, the film doesn't just merge old and new for fun. It uses both casts to reinforce the story and the stakes, and that honestly is one of the most impressive feats of Days of Future Past. The cast in Days of Future Past is almost unfair. This movie has so many recognizable faces that it could have easily turned into one of those films where everyone shows up, says serious lines, uses a power, and disappears. And to be fair, a few characters do get that treatment. Uta the main performers, they really hold this thing together. Hugh Jackman is still completely at home as Wolverine. At this point, he doesn't have to prove anything in the role. He has the growl, the dry humor, the tired eyes, the physical presence. All of it feels built into him. What works here is that he is not overplaying Logan. He is rough, sure, but there's also the sworn-down quality to him, like he has carried too many bad futures on his shoulders. He gives the movie its familiar pulse. James McAvoy might be the standout emotionally, though. His Charles Xavier is in a messy, painful place and McAvoy doesn't make it pretty. He plays Charles like someone who has lost faith and hates himself a little for it. There are scenes where you can feel the future Professor X buried somewhere underneath all that anger and grief, and that's what makes his arc work. He isn't just doing an imitation of Patrick Stewart. He is showing us the man before he earns that calm wisdom. Michael Fassbender, on the other hand, gives Magneto that sharp, dangerous elegance. He doesn't need to shout to feel threatening. Half the time the danger is in how still he is. You can see why people would follow him, and you can also see why trusting him is a terrible idea. That's the perfect Magneto balance. Jennifer Lawrence has a tricky job as Mystique because the whole future basically turns on her choices. If that performance doesn't work, the movie loses a lot of its weight. And she does make it work. Raven feels angry, isolated, and determined, but not empty. She isn't just there to be chased around the plot. You understand why she is making these choices even when the choices are dangerous. Then you have the veterans. Patrick Stewart brings that calm authority the second he appears. He doesn't need much screen time to remind you why his version of Xavier matters. Ian McKellen does the same with Magneto. There's history in his face, regret in his voice, and still the little edge of menace underneath everything. These two actors carry so much franchise memory with them that even their quieter scenes feel heavier. Peter Dinklage is also a strong addition as Bolivar Trask. He plays him with control, non-cartoon villain energy, which was the right choice. Trask feels like someone who believes he is being practical, maybe even necessary, and that makes him more interesting than if he were just sneering in a lab coat. Nicholas Hoult is solid as Beast, bringing a bit of warmth and conflict to the younger team. Alberry Storm is more limited than you might expect, but this is probably one of her better uses in the series. Ellen Page gives Kitty Pryde importance in the future timeline, even if the movie uses her more as a story mechanism than a full character. Fauna Bing Bing's blink is visually memorable, mostly because her powers make the future battles feel much more dynamic. And then, of course, Evan Peters comes in as Quicksilver and casually walks away with one of the most talked about scenes in the entire movie. That's the funny thing about this cast. Some of them get full arcs, some get small moments. Some are basically there to remind longtime fans, yes, this world is still connected, but because the actresses are strong across the board, even the smaller appearances usually land. The film doesn't give everyone equal attention, and honestly, it couldn't. There are just too many people here. The key performances are strong enough to make the emotional story feel grounded. McAvoy, Fassbender, Lawrence, and Jackman carry the main weight. Willie Stewart and the returning cast to give it that sense of history. It's a big ensemble. Maybe too big in places, but when it works, it really works. Alright. Let's talk about Quicksilver because if there's one moment in Days of Future Past that makes you want to rewind and watch it again immediately, it's him. Evan Peters, in a surprisingly small role, absolutely steals the show, and it's not just because of his powers. Sure, the super speed stuff is incredible, visually inventive, fun, and unlike anything else in the movie. But it's also about timing, humor, and attitude. Quicksilver brings a spark into what could have been an otherwise heavy, tense film. The highlight, of course, is the Pentagon scene. The camera slows down, bullets hang in the air, and he casually rearranges everything in the room so that the security guard's fire misses the X-Men entirely. It's ridiculous. It's playful, and it's completely satisfying to watch. You're laughing, you're impressed, and yet it never feels out of place. Ida serves the story while giving the audience a little moment of joy amidst all the doom and gloom. It's the perfect example of comic book spectacle done right. Instead of flashy moves for no reason, this scene has stakes. The X-Men need to survive. The future depends on it, and Quicksilver is the key. Every move is clever, but it's also fun to watch, and it somehow manages to give the movie some breathing room without undercutting the tension elsewhere. And honestly, Peter's performance is just a pure charisma. He doesn't try to dominate the film. He's not delayed. He makes sure we remember him. A few wall lines, a few expressions, and a singly jaw-dropping sequence, and suddenly a Quicksilver becomes one of the most memorable things in the movie. It's a reminder that sometimes a small role done with confidence, style, and a beat of cheek can overshadow much larger storylines. Quicksilver isn't just a scene stealer. He's a moment that makes the movie feel alive in a way that's playful, inventive, and utterly unforgettable. Mystique's role in Days of Future Past is interesting because she is not just part of the story the time. She basically is the turning point of the story. Everything depends on what Raven decides to do. If she kills Trask, the future collapses into the Sentinel nightmare. If she walks away, Historia has a chance to move differently. That puts a lot of pressure on one character. And honestly, it is a pretty bold choice because Mystique was not always treated as this central emotional force in the earlier films. Here though, the movie makes her matter in a much bigger way. She is not simply a cool blue assassin sneaking through government buildings. She is angry, hurt, and convinced that she is doing what needs to be done, and that makes her more compelling. You might not agree with her plan, but you would understand where it comes from. She has seen what humans are willing to do to mutants. She has seen experimentation, fear, control, and cruelty. So, when she decides that Traz deserves to die, Ida does not feel random. It feels like pain turning into action. The tricky part is that some viewers may wonder why a Mystique became this important to the franchise all of a sudden. And yeah, I get that if you are thinking back to the earlier films, it can feel a little strange that the entire future of mutant kind suddenly revolves around her choice. But Jennifer Lawrence helps sell it. She gives Raven enough emotion that the plot does not feel completely mechanical. Mystique is not just a device the movie uses to trigger the Sentinels. She feels like someone is standing at a dangerous crossroads. Revenge is right there. Power is right there, and walking away from it would not be weakness. It would be the harder choice. That is what gives her role a weight. The movie is not only asking whether Mystique can be stopped, it is asking whether she can still choose what she wants to become before the world turns her into a symbol. Because once she pulls that trigger, her pain no longer belongs only to her. It becomes a history. It becomes propaganda. Ida becomes the excuse for a war that it destroys everyone, and that is why her expanded importance works better than Ida probably should, even if you question how central she has become. Her emotional position in the story is strong. Raven is caught between Charles' hope and Eric's violence, between being hunted and becoming the reason others are hunted. For a movie about changing the future, Mystique is the character standing closest to the moment where everything breaks. Magneto is one of those characters who can walk into a scene and immediately change the temperature. And in Days of Future Past, that presence is still there. Fassbender plays the younger Eric with the cold, controlled confidence that makes him fascinating to watch. even when he is making the worst possible decision. He does not need to scream, he does not need to over-explain himself. Perhaps the danger comes from how calm he is. You can see the calculation happening behind his eyes, and that is what makes him so unnerving. The thing with Magneto is that he is rarely just a villain. That is too simple. He is dangerous because he has a point, or at least enough of a point to make people listen. He understands fear. He understands the persecution. He understands what happens when powerful people decide mutants are a problem to be solved. But then he takes that pain and turns it into a domination. That is where Eric becomes terrifying. In this movie, every time the mission looks like it might hold it together, Magneto finds a way to complicate it. He does not really trust the teamwork. He does not fully trust Charles. He definitely does not believe in waiting around for humans to do the right thing. So, even when he is technically helping, there is always this feeling that he has another plan forming in his head. And visually, the movie knows exactly how to use him. Whenever Magneto uses his powers, the film gives the moment weight. It is not just metal flying around for the sake of a cool shot. There is scale to it, a force. Intimidation. The stadium sequence is the obvious big one. It is pure Magneto theater. He does not just move something massive because he can. He turns it into a statement. He reshapes the environment around him like he is announcing to the world, this is what power looks like. That is why Magneto's scenes land so well. He is not just powerful, he believes his power gives him clarity, and that is the dangerous part. Eric is so convinced that fear must be answered with greater fear that he becomes almost impossibly to reason with. Even when you understand his anger, you can see how quickly it leads him somewhere frightening. Fassbender captures that balance beautifully. There is elegance in his Magneto but also cruelty. There is a dignity but also arrogance. He can seem wounded one second and completely ruthless the next, and that is what makes him such a strong presence in Days of Future Past. He is not always on screen, but whenever he is, the movie feels less stable in the best possibly way. Charles Xavier's arc is probably the strongest emotional thread in Days of Future Past. And what makes it work is that the movie doesn't introduce him as the Professor X we expect. We know Wolverine finds him in 1973. Charles is not calm, wise, patient, or full of hope. He is a mess. He is drinking, hiding away from the world, and using a serum that lets him walk but cuts him off from his powers. That detail is important because it is not just a physical trait. It says something about where he is emotionally. Charles would rather numb a part of himself than feel everything he has lost. That is a darker place for this character. We are used to seeing Xavier as the dreamer, the man who believes people can be better, the man who looks at fear and still chooses compassion. But here that man is buried. James McAvoy plays him like someone who has been disappointed so deeply that hope now feels almost insulting. There is anger in him, but also shame. He knows he has fallen apart, and he hates being reminded of what he was supposed to become. That is why Wolverine's arrival hits him so hard. Logan is not just asking Charles to help with a mission. He is asking him to become himself again, and that is much harder than stopping a bullet or breaking someone out of prison. Charles has to face the fact that he walked away from his students, from his dream, from his gift, from the responsibility that comes with being who he is. The scene between a young Charles and older Xavier is where the arc really lands. It could have felt like a gimmick, two versions of the Samia character sharing a big emotional moment, but it doesn't. It feels quiet, painful, and strangely comforting. Older Xavier is not there to lecture him like a perfect saint. He is there as proof that Charles can survive this moment, that the pain he feels now does not have to be the end of him. And McAvoy is excellent in those scenes. He lets Charles be ugly in his sadness. Not evil, not cruel exactly, but wounded in a way that makes him selfish and lost. Then slowly you see the old belief started to come back. Not all at once. Not in some clean heroic switch, more like a man remembering how to stand up emotionally before he fully becomes the leader everyone needs. That is what makes his journey satisfying. Charles does not save the future by becoming a powerful again in the usual superhero sense. He saves it by choosing hope when hopelessness would be easier. He chooses to reach Mystique instead of control her. He chooses to believe that only a person can still change direction before a history locks into place. For a movie packed with robots, timelines, and giant set pieces, Charles Xavier's arc gives it something human. It reminds you that sometimes the biggest battle in an X-Men film is not against the machine outside. It is against the despair inside the person who is supposed to lead everyone else. The Sentinels are probably the most effective threat in Days of Future Past because the movie doesn't treat them like ordinary robot enemies. They are not just there to give the X-Men something big to fight. From the opening scenes, the Sentinels feel like a nightmare that has already won. They don't hesitate. They don't get tired. They don't care who the mutants are, how powerful they are, or how hard they fight back. They just adapt, attack, and erase them. That's what makes themes scary. Not personality. Not speeches, not villain monologues. Just cold and mechanical certainty. And honestly, that works really well. A lot of superhero movies struggle when the villain is basically an army of machines. It can become boring fast. Just waves of gear bodies being smashed around until the movie decides it's over. But here, the Sentinels have weight because the film shows us what they mean. These machines are the reason the future is dead. They are the reason the remaining mutants are hiding. They are the reason even the characters as powerful as Storm, Magneto, Iceman, and the others feel like survivors instead of heroes in control. The future battles self-out beautifully. Every time the Sentinels appear, there is this ugly sense that the mutants are only delaying the inevitable. They can fight smart, they can combine powers, they can throw everything they have at them. But the Sentinels keep adjusting, keep pushing, keep closing in. That makes them more than just physical villains. They are a symbol. They represent fear turned into a technology. Human prejudice given metal skin. The idea that if society becomes afraid enough of people who are different, it will eventually build systems to control them, classify them, and destroy them. That is why they feed us so well in an X-Men story. The Sentinels are not just big robots, they are the theological endpoint of everything the franchise has been warning about from the beginning. And that is what makes Traz's creation so disturbing. He doesn't just build weapons. He builds a future where fear becomes automated, where persecution no longer needs emotion behind it. It becomes a program, a mission, a machine that never questions itself. That's chilling. The Sentinels also give the time travel plot a real urgency. If Wolverine fails, this is what everyone is heading toward. Noted just obeyed future. Not just a darker timeline, extinction. The movie makes that clear without needing to explain it every 5 minutes. You see the Sentinels in action and you understand immediately why the past has to change. So they may not be characters in the traditional sense. They are still powerful villains. Maybe even more powerful because of how impersonal they are. They don't hate mutants. They don't need to. They were built by people who did. Visually, Days of Future Past has a really strong sense of contrast. The future scenes look cold, ruined, and almost drained of life. Everything feels broken down. The cities, the atmosphere, even the people. There is this heavy metallic darkness to those sequences that immediately tells you the world has already lost. The movie doesn't need to over-explain how bad things have become. You can see it in the empty spaces, the destroyed environments, and the way the surviving mutants move like they're always one step away from being wiped out. Then the film jumps back to the 1970s, and suddenly the texture changes. The past has more warmth, more color, a more physical detail. The clothes, the rooms, the political spaces, the little period touches. It all gives that a timeline its own identity. It doesn't feel like the same world with a different date stamped on it. It feels like history before the damage fully sets in, not innocent exactly, but still alive. That visual separation helps the storytelling more than people might notice, because with a film jumping between two timelines, you need the audience to feel the difference instantly. The future is where everything has collapsed. The past is where everything is still unstable, still dangerous, but not yet doomed. The cinematography supports that without making it too obvious or showy. The film also has a slickness to it that fits the scale of the story. It looks polished, expensive, and controlled. The action scenes have weight, the quieter scenes have atmosphere, and the bigger images, especially the ruined future and Magneto's large-scale power moments, have that comic book grandeur without becoming completely cartoonish. And do you like that the movie doesn't look flat? A lot of modern superhero films can start to blur together visually, especially when everything becomes CGI smoke, rubble, and glowing energy. Days of Our Future Past does have plenty of digital spectacle, no doubt, but the best-looking moments still feel tied to mood. The future looks oppressive because it is oppressive. The 1970s setting feels slightly strange and tense because the story is playing with history, politics, and paranoia. It is not just cool visuals for the sake of cool visuals. The images are helping tell the story. That's why the visual style works. It gives the film scale but also atmosphere. It lets the future feel like a nightmare and the past feel like a fragile chance to avoid it. And for a movie built around changing history, that contrast matters. The production and design in Days of Future Past does a lot of quiet heavy lifting, and I mean that in a good way, because this movie is constantly moving between two very different worlds. The ruined future and the 1970s past. If those two timelines didn't feel visually distinct, the whole thing could have become muddy very quickly. But the film gives each year its own texture, its own mood, almost its own smell, if that makes sense. The future is stripped down and grim. Everything feels hard, cold, and metallic. The spaces are dark, damaged, and practical. Like the characters are no longer living in the world so much as hiding in whatever corners are left. There's no comfort there. No softness, just survival. Then we jump back to the 1970s and the movie suddenly gets more personality. The costumes, the hair, the rooms, the decor, the political spaces, all of it feels carefully chosen without becoming a parody of the decade. You get the period flavor. Yes, but the film doesn't stop dead just to say, look, it's the 70s. It's more casual than that. A lava lamp here, a suit there, a certain color palette in the background, and suddenly the whole timeline has a different energy. That's the kind of design work I appreciate. It supports the story without shouting over it. The makeup is also a big part of why the world works. Mystique's look still has that striking screen presence, the blue skin, the texture, the transformations. It's familiar by this point, but still effective. And Beast's design feels improved, too. His transitions have more polish, and Nicholas Holt's version of the character feels more naturally integrated into the movie than he easily could have. Costume-wise, the film has a tricky job because it's dealing with superhero characters, period clothing, and future war survival gear all at once. That can easily look ridiculous, but most of it lands. The future costumes feel functional and battle-worn. The 1970s clothes give the past timeline some character. and the returning older cast has enough visual familiarity that you immediately understand the history Thea carry. Even the art direction helps sell it. The scale, the government locations, Thea prison setup, the ruined Futuria hideouts, the political interiors, Thea all give the movie a sense of place. It doesn't feel like the actors are just standing in front of expensive via backdrops. The environments feel connected to the tension of the story. That's what makes the design impressive. It isn't just about making things look cool, although plenty of it does look cool. It's about making the timeliness feel different, making the characters feel rooted in their worlds, and giving the whole film polished, live quality. For a movie with this much bloated machinery, those details matter. They make the past feel alive, they make the future feel dead, and somewhere between those two visual worlds, the movie finds its stakes. The special effects in Days of Future Past are just this is a film where CGI could have easily overwhelmed everything. Giant Sentinels, massive city destruction, mutant powers flying in every direction. It's the kind of thing that can turn it into a digital mess really fast. Here, the effects are not just eye candy, they actually serve the story. Take the Sentinels for example. They are enormous, intimidating, and perfectly terrifying, but they don't just exist to look cool. Every move they make raises the stakes for the characters. You feel the threat because the film makes it clear these things are relentless, adaptive, and lethal, and that's what makes the chaos in the future timeline so gripping. Then there's Quicksilver, that sequence in the Pentagon, slow motion, bullets frozen midair, objects rearranged with insane precision, is only of the most inventive uses of CGI I've seen in a superhero film. It's playful, it's clever, and yet it's fully integrated into the story. You're laughing, you're impressed, and it actually matters. That's a rare thing in a movie that relies so heavily on visual effects. The destruction sequences in the future timeline are also beautifully done. Cities crumbling, buildings destroyed, mutant hideouts obliterated. It feels grounded despite being huge and fantastical. You believe that the stakes are real. Every explosion, every collapsing structure, every lightning-charged attack from Magneto carries a weight. Even subtle effects, the portals, the psychic powers, the beast transformations are polished without calling too much attention to themselves. The visual language of the movie is consistent, which keeps the audience immersed instead of distracted, and the best part, the effects never take over the characters. They enhance the story instead of replacing it. You still care about Charles, Eric, Mystique, and Wolverine because their actions drive the CGI, not the other way around. So, yeah, the CGI is flashy, it's huge, it's impressive, but it's also smart. It gives the movie scale, danger, and spectacle without ever feeling empty. And when you combine that with the character drama, the time travel stakes, and the future past contrast, it really makes Days of Future Past feel like the blockbuster it was always meant to be. The action in Days of Future Past works because it doesn't all feel like the same kind of noise. That's a small thing, but it matters. A lot of superhero movies hit a point where every fight starts to blur together. Energy blasts, bodies flying through walls, buildings breaking apart, someone yelling over the music. And the routine, but here, the major set pieces each have their own flavor. They're not just bigger versions of the same scene. The opening future battle is probably the harshest one. It throws USA straight into survival mode. The X-Men are not dominating the Sentinels, they are scrambling, combining powers, buying seconds, trying to survive something that feels almost impossible to beat. That gives the scene a real sense of panic. It's not heroic in the usual clean way. It's desperate. Then you get the 1970s prison escape and the whole movie suddenly shifts gears. Theta sequence is lighter, sharper, and more playful, mainly because of Quicksilver. It's not about brute force, it's about a timing, style, and a weird little burst of fun in the middle of a very serious story. The slow-motion room sequence could have been a gimmick, but it's staged so well that it becomes one of the film's defining moments. It's clever action, not just loud action. Magnetos' set pieces are different again. Whenever he uses his powers, the film leans into a scale. He doesn't just fight people, he rearranges the world around him. The stadium sequence is the obvious example. And it's exactly the kind of comic book image that could look ridiculous if the movie didn't commit to it, but it does. Magneto turns a massive public space into a weapon, a prison, and a statement all at once. It's dramatic, slightly insane, and very much in character. The future Sentinel attacks bring back that feeling of dread. Every time those machines appear, the action becomes tense because the movie has already shown us how dangerous they are. The mutants can fight beautifully as a team, and the combination of powers is exciting to watch, but there's always that ugly feeling that they're only delaying the inevitable, and that's what gives these set pieces weight. They're not just inserted to wake the audience up. Each one pushes the story or reveals something about the characters. Quicksilver's scene gives the film humor and invention. Magneto's scenes show his terrifying confidence. The future battles remind us what failure looks like. Even the climactic action is tied to the question of whether the past can still be changed before everything collapses. Not every moment is perfect. Some of the CGI-heavy fighting does get a little busy, and depending on your taste, the final stretch may feel more chaotic than elegant, but overall, the action is strong because it has rhythm. It knows when to go brutal, when to go stylish, when to go playful, and when to go huge. That variety keeps the movie alive. Days of Future Past gives you a spectacle definitely. But the best set pieces don't feel empty. They feel connected to fear, desperation, ego, survival, and choice. And that's why the action lands harder than just another round of mutant smashing robots. Days of Future Past is not a gentle movie. And honestly, it shouldn't be. From the very start, you realize this isn't about a cartoonish superhero violence. The Sentinels are terrifying. And the attacks on mutants are brutal. They're area moments that push the limits of P-13 rating, limbs flying, people getting torn apart, and the real sense that failure here is catastrophic. It's violent in a way that feels earned, not just there for shock value. You feel the danger, and it isn't abstract. The mutants can die, humans can die, stakes are real, and the film lets you see it. What's interesting is that even with all of that intensity, the movie doesn't lean into gore for its own sake. It's a superhero film, not a horror movie. You get the impact, the tension, the fear, but it's still stylized enough that it's thrilling rather than disgusting. You walk away feeling the weight of what's at risk, but not traumatized for the wrong reasons. There are few scenes where the intensity is almost overwhelming. The future sequences especially are harsh. You see mutants and humans alike falling to the Sentinels' relentless assault. It's fast, violent, and relentless. Yet, the film tempers that with moments of calm, a quick joke, a character interaction, or a slow-motion sequence like Quicksilver's Pentagon scene. Giving your brain a breather without it undercutting the danger. Even the Wolverine's fights, which could have been non-stop slaughter, are mostly about efficiency. He's brutal when he needs to be. But he's not there to get a cheap laugh from how violent it looks. The consequences matter. The intensity serves the story, the characters, and the stakes. So, yes. This is a PG-13 superhero movie that doesn't shy away from showing that the future is terrifying. It respects its rating, but it doesn't shy away from making you feel how high the stakes are. You can sense the tension in every fight, every Sentinel attack, every moral choice, and it gives the movie a pulse that a lot of comic book films don't have. It's violent, yes, sometimes a little shocking for a PG-13, but it's the kind of violence that makes the story feel real, urgent, and worth caring about. One of the things Ian noticed right away about Days of Future Past is how it manages its pacing. At 131 minutes, you might expect a film juggling two timelines, a huge ensemble cast, and time travel mechanics to feel bloated. And honestly, it could have been a complete mess. But surprisingly, it rarely drags. The movie opens with the future timeline, and it hits hard, tense, grim, and desperate. You're immediately thrown into the stakes without feeling lost, and that urgency carries through the first hour. They know when the story shifts to 1973. It slows just enough to let the drama breathe. You get character moments, dialogue that matters, and a chance to understand the emotional weight behind the mission. Even with so many characters and bloated threads, the film moves along at a smarter rhythm. The story doesn't linger unnecessarily, and the transitions between past and future rarely feel jarring. Each beat serves a purpose. A fight scene, a conversation, a quiet moment of reflection. It keeps the momentum going without feeling exhausting. The cleverness is that the movie mixes intensity and downtime organically. Quicksilver's Pentagon sequence is playful and allows the audience to exhale for a moment before plunging back into the chaos. Emotional confrontations between Charles, Eric, and Mystique are paced so they hit harder because the movie isn't just rushing to the next explosion. Sure, the second hour has a few slower stretches, especially when juggling multiple bloated threads at once. And yes, if you start overthinking the timelines, you might feel a little tangled, but for the most part, it's remarkably controlled. You will never feel like the film is dragging, and the runtime actually works in its favor, giving characters an action room to coexist without suffocating each other. By the time the climax hits, the movie has earned it. The pacing has built tension, character stakes, and a suspense so that the final battles feel consequential, not just flashy set pieces. In short, Days of Future Past knows when to push forward, when to slow it down, and how to keep the audience engaged across two very different timelines. For a film this ambitious, that's no small feat. The fan service in Days of Future Past is kind of a mixed bag, but mostly in a good way. Because, let's be honest, part of the fun of these movies is seeing so many familiar faces come back. Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Halle Berry, Ellen Page, Shawn Ashmore, Daniel Cudmore. The film knows there is a history attached to these people. It knows that longtime viewers are going to feel something just from seeing the original X-Men cast together again, especially after the franchise had gone in so many different directions. And for the most part, it uses that nostalgia well. The future timeline almost feels like a last gathering. These characters are older, tired, and living in a world that has already punished them. Storm, Iceman, Colossus, Kitty Pryde. They might not all get huge emotional arcs, but their presence gives the future scene as a weight. You're not just watching random mutants fight robots, you're watching the characters who have been part of these series for years trying to survive the end of everything that matters. But at the same time, some of the cameos are definitely thin. A few characters show up mostly to use their powers, remind the fans they exist, and then move out of the way. And depending on who your favorites are, that can be a little frustrating. Rogue especially feels almost painfully underused. Considering how important she was at the start of the franchise, seeing her reduced to such a tiny appearance is disappointing. It's nice that she's there, sure, but it also makes you wish the film had found a better place for her. That's the downside of having this many characters. Someone is always going to get squeezed. The movie has to prioritize the main story, and the main story belongs more to Wolverine, Charles, Eric, and the Mystique than to the returning Futuria cast. So, while the cameos can be exciting, they sometimes feel more like emotional decoration than full character material. Still, I don't think the fan service feels empty. There's a difference between throwing characters on screen just for applause and using them to remind the audience of the world that's at stake. Days of Future Past usually falls into the second category. The returning characters give the future a sense of legacy. They make the danger feel personal because we've seen some of these people across multiple films, and when the movie does let them fight, it's satisfying. Seeing Storm, Iceman, Colossus, Kitty, and the others using their powers together gives the Futuria battles a real team feeling. It's not always deep, but it is exciting. Ida scratches that vanish without completely derailing the movie. So, yes, some characters deserved more. Rogia deserved more. A few others probably did, too. But as a piece of franchisee fan service, Days of Future Past understands the assignment. It brings back the old faces, gives them a sense of dignity, and uses them to make the film feel like a true meeting point between the past and future of the X-Men series. One thing I can't really agree about Days of Future Past is that this movie is packed. Like seriously packed. There are mutants everywhere, old mutants, young mutants, future mutants, returning mutants, new mutants, characters from First Class, characters from the original trilogy, characters who show up for 2 seconds, characters who use one cool power and then basically vanish, or fans. That can be exciting. It gives the movie that big event feeling like the franchise is bringing everyone it can into only a massive turning point. But for casual viewers, yeah, I can see this getting confusing. If you haven't watched the earlier films recently, the movie does not always slow down to help you. Ida doesn't stop and explain every relationship, every power, every old conflict, or every timeline detail. Ida kind of assumes you already know the basics. And if you don't, you may find yourself sitting there thinking, wait, who is that? What can they do? Why does this matter? That's especially true in the future timeline. A lot of characters are introduced quickly, and some of them are treated more like power showcases than fully developed people. Blink opens portals, Bishop absorbs energy, Iceman does his thing, Colossus is there, Starman is there. Kitty has this very important ability driving the whole plot. But unless you already know these characters or remember them from earlier films, the movie doesn't give you much time to settle with them. And to be fair, understand why. The film has a main story to tell, and that story is really about Wolverine, Charles, Eric, and the Mystique. If the script stopped to give every mutant a full introduction, the pacing would collapse. So, the movie chooses momentum over explanation. Most of the time, that works, but it does create a barrier for anyone walking in without much X-Men background. Even the timeline situation can be a little slippery. You have the future, the past, older Xavier, younger Xavier, older Magneto, younger Magneto, Wolverine's mind in his younger body, and a franchise history that already had some messy continuity before this movie even began. That's a lot. It's not impossibly to follow, but it does ask the audience to keep up. So, yes, Days of Future Past handles its crowded story better than Ida probably should, but crowded is still crowded. The film is strongest when Ida focuses on the emotional core. Charles losing hope, Eric choosing force, a Mystique standing at the edge of revenge, Wolverine trying to hold the mission together. That stuff is clear and powerful. The extra characters are fun, sometimes very fun, but they can also make the movie feel a little buzzy around the edges. For longtime X-Men fans, that busyness may feel like a reward. For newcomers, it may feel like they arrived late to a conversation that everyone else already understands. The technical side of Days of Future Past is one of those things you might not think about right away because the movie is so busy with timelines, characters, and a giant mutant killing robots. But it matters a lot. The music, for example, gives the film a sense of weight without constantly begging for attention. John Oateman's score does what a good superhero score should do. It supports the scale, pushes the tension, and knows when to let the emotion come through. It is not just loud background noise under the action. It helps the future scenes feel desperate, the quieter moments feel reflective, and the big set pieces feel properly cinematic. And that's important because this movie has a lot of tonal shifts. One minute we are in a devastated future where mutants are being hunted, then we are back in the 1970s with political tension, broken friendships, and Wolverine trying to convince everyone that the world is going to end. The music helps smooth those shifts. It gives the movie a consistent emotional pulse even when the story is jumping between completely different timelines. The editing is also sharper than people may realize. A film like this could easily become clunky. Past, future, action, dialogue, exposition, character drama, or back to future, or back to past. There are so many moving parts, but the cutting usually keeps the story moving without making Ida feel rushed. We get enough time to see with Charles' pain, enough time to understand Mystique's anger, enough time to feel the pressure building in the future timeline, and then when the action hits, the movie has rhythm. The Quicksilver sequence is the obvious editing showcase because the timing has to be perfect for that scene to work. Ida is funny, smooth, visually clear, and is somehow relaxed in the middle of danger. But even outside that scene, the film generally knows how to move. It doesn't drown every fight in chaotic cuts. You can usually follow the powers, the geography, and the danger. That sounds basic, but in modern blockbuster film, it really isn't. The overall technical craft is strong across the board. The cinematography gives the two timeliness different moods. The production design makes the 1970s feel alive and the future feel dead. The makeup and visual effects help the mutant world feel polished. The editing keeps the plot from turning into a lecture, and the score ties the emotional pieces together. Is every technical element a flawless number? Some CGI-heavy moments look very digital and a few transitions in the story rely more on momentum than the perfect logic, but as a complete package, the film feels professionally built, controlled, expensive, yes, but also carefully shaped. That's what separates it from a lot of overloaded superhero sequels. Days of Future Past has a huge amount of machinery under the hood, but most of the time you don't hear it grinding. The craft is doing its job quietly, keeping the movie stylish, tense, emotional, and easy to stay inside. And for a film this complicated, that is a serious achievement. What makes Days of Future Past stand out is that it doesn't really feel like it's chasing the same energy as every other superhero movie around it, and that's a good thing. A lot of comic book films, especially from that era, were leaning hard into speed, jokes, bright spectacle, and constant one-liners. You know, the rhythm, big action scene, a sarcastic comment, another explosion, another joke, then a bigger action scene. And look, that style can absolutely work when it's done well. It's fun, it gives the audience a good time. But Days of Future Past is playing a different game. This movie is darker, heavier, more serious about its world. It's not trying to be the loudest or the funniest superhero film in the room. Ida has humor definitely, especially with the Quicksilver, but the humor feels like a release valve rather than the wholly personality of the movie. Most of the time, the film wants you to sit with the attention. And I respect that because the X-Men have always had a slightly different flavor. Their stories are not just about saving the city from a villain, they're about fear, prejudice, survival, and whether people who are hated by society can still believe in a coexistence. So, when Days of Future Past takes itself seriously, it doesn't feel like the movie is trying too hard to be important. It feels like the material actually needs that weight, compared to more colorful superhero blockbusters. This one feels more like a dramatic sci-fi thriller with comic book powers inside it. The stakes are not just can the heroes win the battle. The question is bigger and sadder than that. Can they stop history from becoming a machine that destroys them? That gives the film a different kind of tension. Even the spectacle feels different. The action is huge, but it's not always a celebratory. The future battles are harsh, the Sentinels are frightening. The destroyed world has a sense of finality to it. There's no victory lap feeling there. It's desperate. At the same time, the movie is not as grounded or stripped down as something like the darker Batman films. It still has portals, blue shapeshifters, metal bending, time travel, and giant robots. It is very much a superhero movie, but it tries to bring a little more thoughtfulness to the genre. A little more emotional consequence, and that balance is why it works. It has a blockbuster scale, but it doesn't feel empty. It has fan service, but it's not only nostalgia. It has action, but it doesn't forget character. In a crowded superhero landscape, Days of Future Past manages to feel distinct because it leans into what makes X-Men different instead of trying to copy everyone else. It's not the funniest superhero movie. It's not the cleanest one either. But it has a seriousness, a sadness, and a sense of history that give it real identity. And that's why even beside the bigger and flashier comic book films, it still holds its own. For all the praise Days of Future Past deserves, it is not a flawless movie, and the biggest weakness is probably the same thing that makes it interesting: the time travel. The film moves fast enough that while you're watching it, most of the logical problems don't completely ruin the experience. You're invested in the mission, the characters, the Sentinels, and the whole ticking clock feeling of it. But once you step back and start to thinking about the timeline too carefully, some cracks show up. There are moments where the rules feel a little soft, cause and effect do not always line up as neatly as they should. Certain choices feel designed more to create drama than because they make perfect sense. And the ending, depending on how generous you're feeling, is either emotionally satisfying or a little too convenient. That reset feeling is tricky. On one hand, it gives the franchise a cleaner future and softens the damage from earlier films. On the other hand, part of you can feel the movie quietly sweeping a few problems under the rug. It's clever, but it is still a bit of a cheat. A very entertaining cheat, but a cheat. The crowded cast is another issue. The movie has so many characters that some of them will barely get room to breathe. For long-time fans, it is fun seeing familiar faces return, but not everyone gets treated equally. Some mutants are there mostly to show off a power, take part in a battle, or provide a quick nostalgia hit. Rogu's tiny appearance feels especially disappointing when you remember how important she once was to the series. Even Storm and some of the other returning characters feel more like emotional decoration than fully used characters. And if you're a casual viewer, that overcrowding can become confusing. The film assumes you know a lot already. It expects you to understand the older cast, the younger cast, the relationships, the previous films, and at least some of the franchise's messy continuity. If you haven't watched the earlier movies in a while, you might find yourself playing a catch-up. Who is this? Why does that matter? Wait, which timeline are we in now? It is not impossible to follow, but it is definitely not the easiest entry point. There are also a few character decisions that feel questionable. Magneto, for example, is compelling us always, but some of his choices make the mission harder in ways that can feel slightly forced. The movie wants the attention of not knowing whether he can be trusted, and that works dramatically. But every now and then you can feel the script pushing him into conflict because the plot needs another complication. The second half is also a little less clean than the first. The first hour has such a strong momentum. The future threat, a Wolverine's arrival in the past, Broken Charles, the prison escape, a Quicksilver scene, it all moves beautifully. Later on, the film is still engaging, but the machinery becomes more visible. The plot starts spending a bit more. The climax is big and exciting, but not every piece of it feels completely airtight, and visually, most of the effects are impressive. Some CGI-heavy moments do look very digital. Not enough to wreck the film, but enough that certain future battles can feel a little artificial compared to the stronger character scenes. Still, none of these flaws sink the movie. That is the important thing. Days of Future Past has issues, but they are the kind of issues you can live with because the film is doing so much else right. It has ambition, it has strong performances. It has emotional weight, it has great set pieces. It understands the X-Men better than many of the franchise's weaker entries. So, yes, the timeline is messy, yes. Some characters are underused, and yes, the ending may feel a little too neat, but honestly, considering what this movie had to accomplish bringing two casts together, repairing a troubled franchise, adapting a major comic book storyline, and still delivering a satisfying blockbuster, it is impressive that it works as well as it does. The flaws are definitely there, but they never overshadow the achievement. By the end of X-Men, Days of Future Past, what stands out most is just how easily this movie could have gone wrong. It had almost everything working against it. Two timelines, two casts, time travel, Sentinels, franchise cleanup, comic book expectations, returning characters, new characters, continuity problems, and an emotional reset hidden inside a summer blockbuster. That is an enormous amount for a single movie to handle. And yet, somehow, it manages to carry that weight. Not perfectly, of course. The timeline logic is far from flawless, and not every character gets the attention they deserve. Some developments feel a little too convenient, while a few cameos are over it almost as soon as they begin. If you start pulling apart every cause and effect connection, the story can become a little shaky. But as a complete movie experience, it works beautifully. It has scale, but it also has emotion. It delivers spectacle without becoming empty spectacle. It uses nostalgia without depending entirely on it. Most importantly, it remembers that the X-Men are at their best when the story is about more than superpowers. At its heart, this is a story about fear, survival, identity, regret, and the painful possibility that people can still change before it is too late. That is a major reason this film ranks so highly within the franchise. For some fans, X2 will always be the peak, and honestly, I understand why. It has that dark, focused, confident superhero sequel energy that still holds up. For others, First Class may be the favorite because it gave the franchise a fresh sense of life when it desperately needed one, but Days of Future Past absolutely belongs in that same top-tier conversation. In some ways, it is the most ambitious X-Men film. Maybe it is not the cleanest or the simplest, but ambitious? Absolutely. It takes the old series and the new series and finds a way to make them work together. It gives Hugh Jackman another strong Wolverine performance without allowing him to dominate the entire movie. James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, and Jennifer Lawrence carry much of the emotional weight, while Patrick Stewart and McKellen return with genuine significance. Then there is Quicksilver, whose unforgettable sequence became one of the most memorable moments in superhero cinema. The Sentinels also work surprisingly well, feeling like a genuine nightmare rather than just another army of CGI enemies. That is already a lot for one movie to accomplish. The fact that the film also serves as a course correction for the franchise makes the achievement even more impressive. It bends time, repairs years of continuity damage, and gives the X-Men movies a new future. You can call that clever, you can call it convenient. Honestly, it is probably both. But most importantly, it is satisfying. That is the word I keep coming back to. Satisfying. The movie feels like it was made by people who understood the pressure surrounding the franchise. They knew fans wanted the original cast to be respected. They knew the younger cast needed room to grow. They understood that the series came with a lot of baggage, and they knew the story needed to feel enormous while remaining personal. For the most part, they found that balance. So no, Days of Future Past is not flawless, but it is exciting, emotional, stylish, and surprisingly thoughtful for a blockbuster this crowded. It is one of those rare franchise movies that manages to repair what came before while still telling a genuine story of its own. For me, it stands as one of the best X-Men films, maybe even the best, depending on the day. And even if you would not put it at number one, it is difficult to deny what the movie achieved. It took a broken timeline, a divided franchise, and years of uneven storytelling and transformed them into one of the most entertaining and rewarding superhero sequels of its era.